orchids, herbs, houseplants, carnivorous plants. What tools do I use? Do we use these? No, no. Stick around, I'll show you what I use. Choosing the right tool means knowing the plant you're working with. Are you working with something delicate, tiny roots, small plant, loose soil? Are you working with something with much larger roots, different type of soil? Are you cutting stems? Are you working with something that is fine roots, like this newly rooted Nepenthes? Or are you working with something that's been in a pot for a long time and is heavy soil, potting soil, and many different plants in here, and you've got to do something aggressive in there? Knowing the plant you're working with, knowing the type of media you're working with, really makes a difference on tools. Do you need something big and heavy? Do you need something delicate and tiny? Figure it out from the tools you're using, with the plants you're using, with the media you're using. They all go together. One of the important things to have is a good tray. I've got a 1020 tray here, and I've got a scrapbooking tray here that I stole from my wife. Don't tell her. What I use these for: if you're making a mess, these make it great for cleanup. You're going to set out a pot of leaking potting material, or you've got some sphagnum moss that you're working with, in or out of a pot. Easy to handle, easy to clean up, no worry. If you spill your orchid moss, don't worry about it. It makes it real easy to clean it and get it out of there. Some of the tools I have are big scoops. I've got this one that was in the pet food department, and I've got another big scoop. These are great for scooping out the media that you need. Your dirt, your coconut, or whatever media that you're using. This one is great when you need to get into the pot. It's kind of a version of a Japanese hori-hori. Allows you to get into the pot to be able to break the soil away from the edge of the pot without getting into damaging the roots. It does have a cutting edge on it, so that helps out also, and a little area where you can start clipping some of the material that's in there if you've got weeds growing, if you want to get rid of some of the weeds, even though that's a plant that's overgrowing everything. It allows you to get in there and trim some of that. But these are a great tool to have for gardening, for house plants, for many other uses around the house. These are my digging tools. I've got a variety of tools, from small size shovels to fork, spoon, even a putty knife works out for using when I'm putting in roots, things like that. If I take a shovel like this, I can stick this in the dirt, in the media, push it to the side, forming a little cavity in there. And if this was a root, I can be able to put that in deep enough where I get good contact with the soil and form around that. That's much better than trying to dig out, so much dirt and to be able to put the plant in. So that's my suggestion on a small shovel, or even the putty knife, to be able to dig in, push the media away, and put your root down into it. It works out really well. Also, to help with that, I have tweezers that allows me to take the root and work it down into the media, into the soil, and I don't disturb it so much if I'm able to grab the root gently and work it down in there. I'm not trying to shove it down and force it into place. I've got a number of different tweezers that I use for that. These are my two favorite. I've got the bent one and I've got the straight one. They're both long. I also have a pair of forceps that do kind of the same thing. Give me that area where I can get into the soil, or it helps me when I'm pulling something away from the soil. So forceps, tweezers, great tools to have around for potting, repotting, dividing, whatever you're doing with your plants. When you're doing cuttings on plants, a good scissors is really the best thing to have. Keep them clean, use alcohol if you need to sterilize, but a good pointy scissors, you can see the point on this thing is quite sharp, allows you to get into smaller areas and clip what you need. I also have this small scissors that I use sometimes, not as much, but allows me to get also into the tighter areas. A razor blade knife will help cut large areas. If I was going to whack this up, that will help out with larger stemmier woody type of plants. The fine stuff not so much, but also a good thing to have around the house for your house plants or whatever you're cutting up in the garden. Sometimes a set of picks comes in really handy with working with the plants. You can be using it for pulling seeds out of the pod, for doing some delicate separation of plants, or for doing some home dentistry. Well, probably not for that. But there's a lot of different picks and tools that I use that very, very cheap. Pick these up at a local hardware store for a couple of bucks. So make use of those occasionally. Easy to use, handy to have when you need it. Another way to make your media ready for a root is a small plunge type tool like this. It's got two different edges on it, and I can stick this into my soil, make a little hole that allows me to insert my fake root into the hole. Gives me good depth doing it that way. Very nice and easy to use, keep it clean. Another thing, even if you don't have that piece of stick, you can do almost the same thing. A Sharpie, some type of tool where you can get in there and just get a hole ready so you can use your new hole and put in your roots without trying to disturb things. Then you can gently push the dirt in, the soil in, and it will disturb the roots less. Disturbing your roots is one thing that's going to slow down your plant. So the less you disturb your root, the faster your plant is going to recover. If I'm going to add to my media, my soil, or to change things around in there, scoop around a little bit, these are a couple of handy little tools. This one is particularly good for using when I'm adding a sand as a topper to my Venus flytraps. Don't want to do that one, so let's do this one. If I'm going to add sand in there, I can add a small scoop of sand, and I can put it exactly where I want on the soil. I'm not broadcasting it throughout. I'm just kind of putting it into the exact spots where I want it. So a small spoon or a scoop or something of that nature, real helpful when you're getting into the tighter places. You have to have labels. All your plants need to be labeled. I have two different sizes in mine. I've got the little smaller 4 inchers, and then I've got the larger size. And the larger size, just to give you a comparison, there's a larger size and the smaller size. So we've got quite a bit of difference there in size. Why does that make a difference? Well, something if you got Nepenthes or some of the orchids, they've got long names and they can go on there. In the case of this one, I've got a label on that, and I have enough to go into the pot and still stick up. It does bottom out and still shows up on here, so that works out fine. And how am I marking my labels? Well, what comes with the labels is a nice little pencil, and this is a I suppose if you are a golfer, this comes with your scorecard, but it does write well on the labels as they are. If you're going for more permanent, well, a fine Sharpie will work out really well. And then if you go to one more stage up, and you get one of these label makers. This one happens to be a pretty decent one. What I don't like is, I would love it if it had a connection to a computer where I could plug in a USB cord onto it and do all my programming on the computer. It does do a pretty good job on it. As you can see, the printing is pretty good on it. And I can, if I'm going to do 5 labels, 10 labels, or even just a single label, print it in there and type out and print out how many I want. The print option gives me options on how many. I can put different fonts, labels, and such on there. So that's the next step up when you're going to be labeling your plants. Sometimes when you're working with your plants, you find that you've got a problem and you need to see what's going on. A good set of eye loops is real handy. This one is a lit type. It's got a little button on here with you can see the lights in there, the LEDs. I've got the white lights and I've got a blue light, which I have not used. I don't know where that would be used. Problem with this one is it is a fixed focus. It is going to be at that point only. I do have a set that I bought from Harbor Freight, again, really cheap, but they've got 2, 3, 5, 7, and 10, and so I can use those in looking at bugs on my leaves, or see if a seed is germinating. I can focus it in on it tight. So it's not a necessity, but it's been real helpful for me. One thing that I do use when I'm working with my dry media is I do use a mask. Not necessarily this one. This one is more for when I'm using chemicals. It does have a charcoal or some type of an agent in here to help with the chemical use. But I do use a dust mask if I'm using perlite, if I'm using the sand. Even the peat, when it's dry, it will float in the air quite a bit. So a good mask is a real handy thing to have. So I do suggest the mask, even for the plain old perlite and chemicals. So when you're thinking of working with your gardening plants, these are great. But when you're thinking of working with your indoor plants, whether they be carnivorous, orchids, houseplants. Is this even a houseplant? Who knows? It works. Use these tools instead. They work great for the inside. These are great for your garden tools. Hope you learned something, and if you have questions, please ask. I'm always willing to help out.